Okay, so a short disclaimer before we begin tonight's article. And, well, I'm going to be very, very careful, but also very, very certain in my approach. Now, first of all, if you want to actually hear what my own opinions are on this matter, please make sure to stick with us till the end. Especially if you are from outside of the US. If you are, however, from the UK and watching this, because there's been a very substantial ruling in a Supreme Court that biologically women are identified as women based on biology. Despite that, there's been also a lot of inward debate within this current government about whether or not they actually stand by this ruling, although why exactly cooperation is hardly necessary, but whether or not a government, a group necessarily agrees with it, in law, that's what they've decided. But apparently some people are sniffing around suspecting that not everybody is on the same page. Now, there is a great deal of irony when it comes to the law and certain things that certain, spinners, if you will, have put on this. But, especially if you've been in the UK for the last 9 years. But, we will get to that towards the end of this, because there's a lot of things to discuss, and, well, let's go through this, shall we? Note on misinformation. This article previously included information that was primarily speculative or incorrect. This has been fixed. For more information, see here. Note. Chris has never admitted to adopting a transgender identity so that he could hook up with lesbians. This is a confusion for a statement Chris has made regarding having an intersex child as a result of his broken English. Pro tip. To keep consistent with records from before Chris's transition in 2014 and not causing additional confusion for readers, the Quickie has opted to use masculine pronouns to describe Chris, even post-transition. Chris's legal name is Christine, but the nickname Chris is gender neutral and can be abbreviative every full name that Chris has identified with. Chris has also accepted it as a nickname, despite formally objecting to it. Chris is legally registered as female and has taken hormones to transition, but has not undergone gender reassignment surgery. Okay, now with all that out of the way, Iron Woman Raw. Chris in Solitude 11 from 2017, borrowing a catchphrase from Rose Chew. We gods had eased up on the views of adultery. Why else do you have pro-gay and pro-lesbian, pro-trans, and all today and past decades? Chris likening the LGBT community to adulterers in a letter from jail, I should say. A person is transgender or trans if their gender identity doesn't match their biological sex. Over 1.6 million US adults are openly trans, and Chris is perhaps the most famous trans person to live in Ruckersville, Virginia in 2011. When Chris was 29 years old, he began exploring male to female gender transitioning, starting with cross-dressing. He would gradually try DIY methods to undergo physical transitioning, which were pointless at best and dangerous at worst. In 2016, he began using legitimate means such as seeing a professional specializing in gender issues and going on prescription hormone therapy later that year. In spite of his best efforts, however, Chris's post-transition appearance remains quite similar to his pre-transition appearance. Only he grew his hair out and had some of his fat distribution rearranged through HRT. Chris has not undergone a male-to-female surgery, however. Well, surgeries, I imagine it's going to be involving more than just one operation. Nonetheless, he believes that he looks like a supermodel. Chris's identity gradually shifted over the course of his transitioning. He began as a transvestite, a male who cross-dresses yet still identifies as a man, or as Chris called it, a tomgirl. Outside of Chris's lexicon, femboy and femme are commonly used to describe this kind of sexual identity in recent years, although Chris himself would not apply after becoming transgender. Nonetheless, Chris actually has used the term femme on his Facebook profile. In 2014, he came out as a lesbian-identified male. By the end of that year, he began identifying as a woman, calling himself a trans woman. In 2015, he started going by the name Christine, making the name change official the following year, as well as changing the gender marker on his driver's license to female. Overall, Chris has seemed to be more at peace with himself being out instead of suppressing his gay/transgender thoughts, if not outright happier, in spite of his depressing lot in life and poor living conditions. Chris's transition has been the subject of intense debate. And actually, just before we go on any further, another little disclaimer I'm going to have to say is that, irregardless, ladies and gentlemen, of what your issues are regarding people who are transgender, at the very least, can we all sort of unilaterally agree that we're going to be civilized and we will not resort to name calling and jumping to erroneous conclusions? No matter how much there seems to be speculation on terms of the legitimacy, let's just try in a very small way to just sort of adopt a live or let live policy, because, and for reasons I'll be getting to at the end of this video, it may not affect my life, it may not affect your life, but somebody who is transgender, it's probably going to specifically involve them. So let's not, go on record and just judge other people for what they do. Let's just stay calm and just sort of be a bit more focused on what we do, because, like I said, it might not affect our lives, but it's going to affect theirs. But I think that's their conscious decision, if you know what I mean. Views by external commentators on social media sites range from fully accepting of Chris's gender and sexuality to scathingly critical, arguing that Chris is only pretending to be transgender to get romantic attention from heterosexual women, or is making the transgender community look bad. Which isn't surprising given that Chris has mostly been rejected by most communities that he tries to join. Unsurprisingly, there are also debates on which pronouns to use when describing Chris, including from transgender observers themselves, who view the aforementioned arguments as gatekeeping, while a number of people in the LGBT community want nothing to do with Chris and would prefer if he not be lumped in with them, especially in light of more recent events. Not helping matters is that Chris has utilized homophobic and transphobic language whenever it suits him. Even after identifying as LGBT, Chris has also attempted to use his identity as a lesbian trans woman as an argument that the people who have banned him from public places are being discriminatory against him, and all lesbians and trans women, much like he has done in the past with his autism, rather than as often justified retribution for his bad behavior. And yes, that is absolutely true. Nothing that Chris has said or done in the past that's ever made him look bad is ever just going to be, retcon out of existence because Chris puts on a bra or grows his hair out. Because, well, there are just some things that it's very hard to look by, and there are also some things that are very, very difficult to forget. I use the term forget because, need I remind everybody, the day after Easter Sunday is when Pope Francis I sadly passed away, and, well, forgiveness is quite a big part in in Catholicism, but I suppose it's more based on a context thing, because, well, Chris has never done anything personally against me. If Chris had, that would be a bit more of a open to discussion about how I would go about forgiving Chris. But what about all the people that Chris has hurt in the past? Stuff like that. Anyway, let's continue. I would rather suffer a painful gender change operation than ever be a homosexual. Chris's written testimony in Sonichu issue 9 of 2008. As of 2024, Chris has not undergone sexual reassignment surgery even after identifying as trans. Gender dysphoria is a feeling of conflict between a person's assigned biological sex and the gender that person identifies as. Typically brought on by aspects of one's assigned gender, the trans community generally divides dysphoria into physical dysphoria, for aspects like hormones, genitals, or body characteristics, and social dysphoria, for aspects like names, pronouns, gender roles, makeup, and clothing. Symptoms in adults last at least 6 months and can include a belief of experiencing feelings socially associated with the desired gender, as well as wanting to be rid of the primary sex characteristics of the birth gender, having instead the sex characteristics associated with the desired gender and be treated socially as the desired gender. Chris has exhibited signs of late onset gender dysphoria, a term describing those who begin to experience gender dysphoria in adulthood. The transition. Tomgirl. Yes, I am a tomgirl, and I am damn proud of it. I have embraced and appreciated my feminine side. I am still totally heterosexual, otherwise I would be a full-blown you-know-what. I have been more self-confident, and I have a sweet sachet walk, hair and wing flirts, and I am greeting women left and right. Well, that's all well and good, Chris, but, well, to be honest, if I saw what I can only best describe as, well, Krusty the Clown on crack coming towards me, I think, well, I would just keep walking. Bear in mind, Chris is still saying as it in the, well, I wish there was any other way of saying that, but also, was that a new shirt? Because I don't recall ever seeing Chris wear this before or after this photo. Also, here is another way to consider me. I am a Ken doll any Barbie doll can dress in her clothes, and I would feel most comfortable in them and to model them for her. Come shopping with me, sweetie. This is the emails that Chris gave to Jackie May 6, 2011. Okay. According to an email Chris sent to Jackie on the 26th of March, Chris started cross-dressing at the beginning of that month. On the 30th of March 2011, Chris changed his PSN quote to the quickism, I am Tomgirl. On the 29th of April, the Tomgirl pictures were released by Surfshack Tito. In them, Chris is dressed in women's clothing, posing in what he believes are seductive positions. For some reason, Chris removed the Tomgirl PSN quote immediately after PSN came back online after a month of inactivity on the 14th of May, possibly due to receiving attention from trolls. On the 16th of August 2011, Chris recorded Kaka Makeup Basics, a makeup tutorial reinforcing his Tomgirl identity. Still officially a heterosexual and proud to be male, some of his words and actions betrayed a deeper gender confusion. He started using the women's restrooms. He told Jackie that he fantasized about fitting in at a lesbian bar where he believed he would have no trouble seducing a lesbian and persuading her to bone. In lesbians' positions, the scissoring thing, with my dick in her vag. What a way with words, huh? I mean, I wasn't exactly expecting, D.H. Lawrence, but do you want to put it in any other context or way, Chris, apart from putting your dick in her vag? Nah, I give up. In December 2013, he confessed to Rebecca, I wish I was born female with the possibility of being a lesbian. Lesbian identified male. On the 14th of August 2014, Chris revealed via Facebook that he was a self-described tomgirl intersex of female soul and male body and a T cross-dresser, posting shortly afterward to being a lesbian in a male body. He also proclaimed that he is a supporter of LBT rights, which seems to have neatly coincided with the advent of his profuse status as a transgender person. His omission of the G was attacked by Kim. in the face of which Chris admitted that the GMs were fortunate to be on the boat, suggesting that he hadn't yet changed his views on gay men. First of all, I just want to say for the record is that what difference, well, by that point, Chris, you're not going to have anything to do with gay men by this point anyway, and to be honest, I really doubt gay men would have wanted anything to do with you anyway, Chris. Also, LBT, so Chris thinks he's going to get his, mind you, with that being said, I think Chris has never had an LBT sandwich or anything like that. I think probably Chris would have enjoyed an LBT sandwich, omitting the lettuce and omitting the tomato. By the way, can I just say for the moment, I know getting distracted by food, but LBT sandwiches are literally the best sandwich, and I will not hear anybody say that they're not. They are the absolute dog's bollocks of sandwiches. The only one that actually comes close was Sainsbury's brand of breakfast sandwiches from 10 years ago that they got rid of for some reason. There was a fly on my door and I just had to kill it. Okay, sorry, where were we? In July of 2014, Chris had a vision while meditating about being a lesbian in a past life. He took it as a sign affirming his gender identity. Years later, in a 2019 interview, he said, "I had exhibited but not totally realized my feminine habits and traits, and then it became more apparent to me that I was definitely soulfully a woman. Due to the vision I had where I saw myself in a past lifetime by the tree at Woodstock, and I was a woman then, so yep, I'm soulfully a woman. So it's a good thing to go on from there, and I never regretted it." In September of 2014, a fan inquired on his preferred gender and pronouns. Chris replied that he was very comfortable being referred to by either pronoun, adding that he would be flattered at being mistaken as a woman. He added that he did not currently have plans to change his name. He also began going to the Impulse Gay Social Club in the fall of 2014. Lesbian trans woman. I am a female soul trans woman, no operation yet, and a lesbian. Chris, January of 2015. In the spring of 2015, Chris changed his mind on his pronoun and name, referred to himself as Christine, apparently ignorant that Christian was originally a female name, a lesbian trans woman using female pronouns. In May of 2015, Chris turned his persona, Chris Chan Sonichu, into a lesbian trans woman. He also wrote about a fantasy in which Chris Chan Sonichu impregnates himself with his own semen to produce 2 children. Okay. After being rejected as a sperm donor in the previous year, Chris tried his own DIY method to preserve his sperm for the possibility of gender surgery. In Chris's specimen sample, and yes, that is about as, it's a little bit on the nose as it sounds, is a video of Chris showing off his collection of semen in Tupperware containers in the kitchen freezer. And dates on the containers indicate that he was doing this for at least 9 months. Though this was futile as the sperm was destroyed by placing it in a home freezer. So, well, it's a good job Chris never had a job working in a kitchen. That's all I'm going to say. In May of 2016, he successfully filed for a name change to Christine Weston Chandler. Later, with the help of his gender psychologist, he also filed paperwork from the DMV for a new driver's license, identifying him as female, which was granted. Chris was unaware that he also had the option to update his birth certificate. Upon finding out, he decided not to, stating, "I had no idea one can update their birth certificate too. For me though, I'd leave mine the way it is, because I am not going to deny my own history and past." Yeah, right, okay. I was born male and dubbed Christopher, but I realized I was female the whole time and changed my name to Christine soon enough. And to have those on my driver's license is good enough for me. Okay. The self-inflicted taint wound, Chris's attempt to free his imaginary vagina, happened in the summer of 2016. In the fall, Chris began taking HRT after it very nearly ended his life. He attended the LGBT events such as Seville Pride, Love is Love, and UVA Remembers Pulse, and considered himself to be a member of the SLGBTQ community. Bisexual trans woman. In early 2018, Chris suddenly announced that he identified as bisexual, rather than as a lesbian, the result of brainwashing from the idea guys to make Chris think he was in relationships with fictional male characters. And why Chris fell for this hook, line, and sinker while trying to prove for the last 6 years the affirmation of Chris's transition in life? Good question. Interest in sexual reassignment surgery. In the years before he formally identified as transgender, Chris had given some thought to sex reassignment surgeries. In 2007, he told Megan, "If I ever stoop down to changing my path, i.e. becoming a homosexual, I might as well get a gender change operation." Chris's thoughts on the procedure shifted over time. In his pre- and early transgender state, his opinion was essentially that male-to-female trans women should not undertake the surgery, as it would not grant them functional female reproductive organs. Later, as his gender identity changed, he became more open to the idea, but wanted to hold off until either Crystal was conceived or his sperm could be preserved. "If my child was a hermaphrodite, I would raise it to be male regardless, since it would not have any eggs anyway. Plus, big bonus for him, in sex with all women, lesbians included, I would imagine." Why Chris is thinking about his child having sex in any capacity or in any context is something that, well, I feel like that's the sort of thing that social services probably would need to have a word about, but, well, whatever. In other words, there were two obstacles in the way of Chris losing his dick. First, a sex change operation wouldn't provide him with reproductive organs. I mean, no shit, Chris. Of course it wouldn't, Chris. Chris, where do you think the fetus is going to kick off? You think you're going to just keep it in a box? You know what? Again, I know that Easter Sunday was only yesterday, but again, it's probably not going to be the last time I quote Life of Brian in this video. Just putting it out there. Since, as a woman, he will not be able to give birth to Crystal personally. He must first impregnate someone. He can't adopt because Crystal must come from blood, tears, and seminal descent. Thank you for describing that so eloquently. Second, his belief that his penis could still be useful for relationship purposes, wanting to be open to all women, straight, bi, and lesbian. Oh, okay, that makes it worse somehow. In a May 2015 Facebook Q&A regarding the operation, he was equivocal and wrote, "I am exploring making the best of this body for any woman born with a vagina." Great, so literally no women are safe then, I guess. That's pretty much what it means. Now, first of all, I must say is that I'm not saying that Chris, should be denied whatsoever from being in any sort of meaningful relationship, which is something that is completely out of everybody's control. And it's not necessarily that Chris can't form a long-term relationship with a legitimate woman, but what we are saying is that Chris does still have the right to have relationships. But just like in Life of Brian, well, what's the point of fighting for Chris's right to have babies when we know he can't have babies? At least not by, impregnating himself. Or herself, I should say. Symbolic of Chris's struggle against reality. Yes, insert that quote in. Fair enough. During 2014, Chris stated that he was contemplating sexual reassignment surgery. I hate being born a male, and after I have my children, I am getting an organ sex change operation. Chris hoping to impregnate someone who will give him a baby boy and a baby girl. He tried to fulfill the prophecy in Crystal's birth by using a sperm bank. However, the bank rejected him. It should also be noted that Chris doesn't have a clue how sexual reassignment surgery works. In June of 2015, he posted an advertisement on Facebook. I deserve to be a full woman with a full functioning vagina. A- blood type. If anyone wants to put the money and trade. Trade what, Chris? What have you got to trade with? You do realize, Chris, you do realize that because of, a lot of people know exactly what you've been up to. A lot of people, they weren't just born under a rock, and more and more people will find out once you are just straight up, you're just gonna put it on a... Chris, I certainly wouldn't do it. As with most things he wants, Chris prefers to sit on his fat lesbian ass and wait for a magical transformation of my body from male to completely female. In 2020, when Chris was asked about if he would be getting a sexual reassignment surgery, he answered with the following: yes, and this body is going to become fully, genuinely transformed and birth able. This also just begs the question about, okay, so Chris apparently wants to give birth to kids, right? Okay. First thing I want to ask is that, well, Chris, I'm just going to put this out there. If there are any women out there who've ever been pregnant before, are you going to be the ones to break it to Chris about how it's not really good? It's going to be 9 months of hard work and quite a lot of frustrating practices. Because I'm not completely oblivious, but I can tell you that it does not look anywhere near as fun as it sounds. Then again, Chris also has to face the reality that, well, how do you suppose you're going to impregnate yourself, Chris? How exactly are you going to do that? Also, let's face it, guys. If Chris wasn't open to that, because medically it's borderline improbable / impossible. No, it's definitely impossible. The only other alternative is for a man to have sex with Chris and to bear kids with. And to be honest, given Chris's rather scathing history when it comes to, what he thinks about men, I can't really see even people who are absolutely desperate would want to do it. So, Chris, you're kind of up the creek without a paddle on that one, son. Daughter. Chris, presumably realizing that his semen would no longer be potent enough to conceive a child due to hormone replacement therapy that he was utilizing, now seems to think that he's got another way to make Crystal and Reginald real. It goes without saying that male to female transgender persons cannot conceive children due to the hormonal imbalances that impact their fertility. And even though research on the possibility of transplanting a uterus into a male to female body is being done, Chris lacks significant income to finance such a procedure anyway. Even though even at this point a procedure like that would be experimental at the very most, presuming that he'd even be healthy enough or physically capable of bearing children. By the time that such a medical breakthrough could be realized, how Chris's plans to get the money to get a sex change or a hypothetical uterine transplantation amidst the financial crisis remains unclear. It's entirely possible that Chris believes that some part of the dimensional merge will allow him to fully become a woman and allow him to fulfill his fantasy of becoming a parent. Unfortunately for Chris, and again, this is a bit more of a serious side to it, is that becoming a parent is not a fantasy. It is the reality for hundreds of millions of people from the moment of conception all the way until the end of their life. Like, if I ever do become a dad, then from that moment on, my kids would be my legacy. From that point until the very end of my life, they are my flesh and blood. And it's not a fantasy. It's not like you can be a parent for one day and then you won't really have to think about it again for the rest of your life because you tried it out. There's a level of responsibility and care that none of us are convinced Chris is fully capable of handling. You know what? There will be a lot of people who will go back and forth about arguments about Chris's legitimacy about being transgender in this video already. However, if there's one thing we can almost all universally agree on, is that Chris's methodology about parental rights, responsibilities, nobody is convinced Chris knows what he's doing. Because you should be responsible enough to care about what you're doing. And do you really think Chris is responsible enough to care? I doubt it. And I don't want to say that to be cruel or anything like that, but that's because of, well, evidence of what we have all seen of Chris already. Not that Chris could afford sex reassignment surgery anyway, as that would cost thousands of dollars. While Chris struggles to pay his basic bills and spends what little time he does saves on frivolities like trips to BronyCon. Well, we know that's certainly not happening anymore. It's even more impossible now that he's been incarcerated. Even then, it's unlikely Chris would go through with the procedure, as doing so would castrate Chris and render him unable to have children. Where the big question mark about Flutter suddenly comes into view is a little bit more bizarre, because apparently Chris has had several trips to Finland during this time. Why? Nobody really knows, but let's continue. List of Chris's male to female transitional methods. Chris has made several attempts to transition into a true and honest woman. Unfortunately for him, he has a strong belief in junk science and miracle cures. As a result, his initial favoured methods produced no benefits or were harmful to his health. In 2016, he saw a psychologist over his trend of transition. Growing his hair out, changing his clothes, shaving his eyebrows, using menstrual pads, piercing his taint and letting it get infected, requesting his fans to fund a prosthetic vagina, wearing a vibrating bra, taking estrogel without physicianal approval, subliminal frequency hypnosis, breast massaging, cutting open his taint with a knife, female hormone vitamins, going on actual hormone replacement therapy, and finally eating prunes and putting soy sauce on everything. The idea being is that, well, the metabolism will be cause Chris to gain some fat around his chest or cavity, and as well his butt cavity, if you will. Voice training. Chris has been making an effort to feminize his voice, but instead of pulling off a convincing femme sound, something like other trans women, he talks with a Mickey Mouse falsetto. The falsetto often drops down to his old voice at some point in a given video, sometimes as soon as he introduces himself. He has also ditched his monotone speech pattern for an extremely sing-songy tone, especially when he adds bits of random access humor. In Q&A No More, he continued to affect a feminine voice when he was yelling, resulting in a cartoonish witch-like scream. Ironically, Chris's pre-transition voice was already naturally high, around the same fundamental pitch as a child. Instead of going even higher in pitch, he could have worked on feminizing his resonance, the buzz of a male voice, and inflections with daily practice, possibly with the help of a voice trainer. But alas, that takes effort, and possibly money that Chris didn't have. Hormonal therapy. At first, between 2015 through the fall of 2016, Chris attempted using estrogel as a DIY hormone therapy method. Since estrogel is a hormone replacement gel meant for menopausal women, and Chris's self-regime consisted of slavering entirely too much of the medication on himself, any effects were questionable and a potential health risk. Chris eventually went on a prescribed HRT treatment consisting of estradiol and spironolactone. Around the fall of 2016, the man in the pickle suit, Marvin, explained, "Basically, if you say the right things to a therapist for a few months, they'll write you a recommendation for HRT and send you to an endocrinologist." Chris was referred to one at UVA. They gave him a script and made him sign away liability, the informed consent part. Chris also mentioned taking hormones to idea Kai. I can't say that Chris knows the fact that he shortened his lifespan at taking those hormones. In fact, I wouldn't say he's, the S word, so much as he's fine with the idea that he could die sooner. I don't know if it counts as his view of reality, but Chris thinks he might be able to have a baby once the transition is complete. I have nothing to do with that. Chris said it's a possibility he could get pregnant. Meanwhile, Chris's health insurance, the taxpayer-funded Medicare program, covers HRT. During the jail saga, Chris still took HRT, shown by a medical receipt from Central Virginia Regional Jail. In a March 2024 livestream, Chris mentioned that he had been taking HRT for years. Now, the reactions. Being a rural southerner, Chris comes from a conservative region and background. His parents are conservative and anti-LGBT. Sentiment is strong outside college and LGBT circles. In addition, forums documenting Chris, from 4chan to Kiwi Farms, tend to be politically incorrect and tell things like it is. As you might expect, reactions to Chris's transition are overwhelmingly negative. While the transgender community was comparatively more welcoming to Chris than other groups, a number of trans activists distanced themselves from Chris following the incest incident, while others found it reprehensible but felt an obligation to respect his preferred pronouns. Parents. Chris's parents were not happy when he began cross-dressing. Bob threw the damned FAG card at Chris. Barbara made negative remarks such as, "I didn't raise a daughter," "Do not wear eyeshadow," "You look like a prostitute," "Lipstick makes you look like a hooker," "You're turning into a GAY," "What are you piercing next?" and "What's next, you wearing a skirt and high heels." Barbara also tried to pay Chris to stop wearing panties and go back to wearing briefs. However, Chris refused. During May of 2011, an angry barber chopped Chris's hair short in a failed attempt to stop him cross-dressing, prompting Chris to call her a bitch. "My mother comes upstairs and yells at me about how she thinks I'm turning queer for being tomgirl and feminine, and she fears that I would kill her. Hand to God, I would never kill anyone, including my own mother and father. Violence and murder is rarely the answer. Murder is morally wrong. I care about my mother and father very much." Debatable. And even worse, she threatens to kill me in an episode of emotional rage. She also took my keys, and shortly later, she tells me to come downstairs. So I go. She tells me to sit down, and she does the worst thing that broke the last straw off my camel's back. She cuts my long hair short and butchered. After seeing the butchered hair in the mirror, I was so in shock I wielded the double-edged sword I had been holding in for weeks since a much earlier fit of emotional rage of hers. I called her a bitch. With her as a bitch, that makes me a son of a bitch, and it hurts me deep too. My hair is so bad I have to wear my Parappa the Rapper wool hat to cover the whole mess when I go out. I cannot be seen in public with this short hair mess. Chris then remarked, "I forgave her due to the butchering of my hair today, but now, while I still care and love for her like a child for a mother, sadly there is now a mutual lack of deep trust between us." Before Bob passed away in the fall of 2011, he told Chris he accepted and loved him for who he was. Over the next few years, Barbara remained opposed to Chris's cross-dressing. Chris stated in 2014, "I would cross-dress more often if my mother was not against me doing it, panties and bra included, but wear them anyway." However, Barbara's resistance gradually diminished and Chris resumed openly cross-dressing. When Chris legally changed his name to Christine in 2016, he did so behind Barb's back, though later she found out and she was livid with him. Chris's gender identity may be the only significant thing in which he has successfully resisted the will of his parents. Locals. In May of 2011, Chris recounted an experience where he got yelled at by a jerk cop for going to the women's restroom and said that, though he felt embarrassed, he would continue using the women's restroom while cross-dressing, as there is no going back for me. Now again, I know what you're probably thinking is that if this had happened in the UK in 2025, Chris probably would have been arrested, or at least slapped a pretty significant fine. In June of 2011, Chris was shopping at Sheetz when a man, seeing him cross-dressing in his attire, asked him if he was gay, to which an upset Chris replied, "No, I am a tomgirl." In a January 2019 tweet, Chris claimed his neighbour across the street from me shouted angrily at me, blaming me for his child questioning their gender identity. Fans. Chris's transition tends to divide many of the observers to his antics. Many who are in the LGBT community support Chris's transition, whilst those critical of him argue that the transition was just an attempt to get with women, and that his gender identity shouldn't be respected because he isn't actually transgender. There are also those who reject the concept of transgender people in its entirety, believing biological sex to be a characteristic that cannot be altered with any amount of surgery or medical treatments, a viewpoint which this wiki does not endorse or condemn, and thus treating Chris as no different to any other transgender individual in refusing to refer to them by their chosen names and pronouns. Overall, most people who follow Chris and his antics tend to refer to Chris using male pronouns and his pre-transitional name, a trend extending to this very wiki. The effect on the love quest. And for nothing more than the experience, you may give me a try in private. Protected and no penetration required. I have an open mind for what you may desire. Traditional for the straight woman, clit rubbing and pussy eating for the lesbians, and anyway for the bisexual women. Massages, making out, lots of attention and eye contact, and whatever else desired. For all women, regardless of orientation. May 2015. Also Chris, and one can view the male part like an extended clitoris, regardless of what it actually is. Put a condom on it and rub the side against a clitoris not only really does good for me, but I imagine and empathize stimulating for her as well. You know, I've just actually noticed something about Chris ever since this article now. He likes using the word empathize a lot, but just saying that Chris believes that that other people can empathize doesn't necessarily mean that they always will. Not too sure what else I've got to add apart from that, but let's move on. Chris's gender dysphoria issues influence the scope of his love quest. As Chris is biologically male while identifying as a female, but still heterosexual. He remained attracted only to women. To resolve this, he identified as a lesbian in order to address both his gender identity and sexuality. Chris also tried to leverage his biological male body in an attempt to appeal to women of other sexual orientations. On various occasions, Chris has made statements to the effect of him being compatible with all women, or that he can go any way a woman's desires. In practice, Chris actually reduced his female dating pool dramatically. Straight women are the majority, and they generally are not attracted to trans women. Chris is essentially limited to lesbian and bisexual women who are open to dating trans women. And that's ignoring actual interpersonal chemistry. All of Chris's prior problems with establishing a real romantic relationship with anyone pre-transition are still present. His attempt to get to the point and solicit sex also fell through, much like it did previously. Mainly because Chris is perceived as being undesirable as a romantic partner for a multitude of reasons. Ultimately, Chris would give up on trying to find a real boyfriend-free girl and would instead engage in a polyamorous marriage with several imaginary friends after being encouraged to do so by the Idea Guys. Well, more specifically, the Idea Guys told him to do it, and, well, he just kind of, well, in typical Chris fashion, kind of, well, rolled over and played dead and just accepted it. Although he would later indicate dissatisfaction with not being romantically involved with real people. This came to a head in June of 2021, when he is alleged to have begun sexual acts against his own mother. When the authorities took him away, he was booked into Central Virginia Regional Jail under his true and honest God-bear-given gender. Dead name. I'm neutral about people calling me Chris or Christine, but I would like if you good people would respect my chosen name. Chris's paradoxical thoughts on the matter. Also, Christine, you effing internet douche whore. During his transition, Chris has occasionally become annoyed at people for referring to him as Chris instead of Christine, despite the fact that Chris, as a short form name, is unisex. He doesn't have an issue with Chris Chan, seeing that Chris Chan Sonichu is his Twitter name. In the comic. Before exploring transgenderism, Chris used the intersex character Sylvana to symbolize the evil trolls. The evil Count Graduon told her, "I'm going to grant you with the power to transform like a ditto. My price is that you will have to relinquish your ability to give birth, and you will be upgraded to have both parts. So with the biological upgrade complete, your years of training can begin." She proceeded to seduce and horrify the tranquil community. In Sonichu 11, Colossal Chris Chan learns of his future self's identity and reflects on it, reasoning that he is not fond of partaking in brutish things, following his meaningless destruction of the 4-cent garbage building and subsequent murdering of several inhabitants. His battle with Mary Lee Walsh, in which he permanently paralyzes her with lightning-based weaponry, and his then retcon execution of the Aspedia 4, Chris then magically starts transforming into a voluptuous woman, a sequence inspired by artist Miss Mako and a collection of gender-bending videos. To him, transitioning is a technique. Hang on, I completely lost my mark. A technique that simply requires an epiphany and ancient powers to immediately turn into a full-fledged woman. Chris drew his avatar, Chris Chan Sonichu / Chris Comic Chris, with the traits he's always desired since becoming a tomgirl, such as eyelashes, bigger breasts, and wider hips, revealing very much of what kind of results Chris wishes to get from his transition. Chris Chan Sonichu and Comic Chris are becoming canonically transgender, becoming a D-cup female with a uterus and ovaries who became pregnant with twins via self-insemination with a turkey baster containing his own semen. Okay. Miscellaneous design changes for the transgender Chris Chan Sonichu include the trademark female Pikachu tail, and the colour of his shoes changed from black and white to turquoise and lime green. Robbie Sonichu has a storyline in Sonichu issue 12 about his gender transition, which closely mirrors Chris's own, from identifying as male to tomgirl to lesbian trans woman. Sonitude 12 also features a short autobiographical narrative of Chris's gender transition at the conclusion of episode 26. The Sonitude body swap. Delusion discourse. Well, disclosure. This article or section takes place during Chris's phase of role-playing as Sonichu. He may refer to his Christine Chandler personality and physical body in the third person by using terms such as mama. And you all know one thing that is also bugging me right now. Sometime recently, Chris felt like prettying my body's bit for her own identity. I could not pull off wearing a white jacket on my white body while I was in it. But the whopper, she put mascara on my face, extending my short eyelashes. It really bothered me. As a spin-off of the dimensional merge coping mechanism, Chris has claimed that he has swapped bodies with imaginary friend Sonichu, allowing Chris's split spirit to manage affairs in Dimension C-197. This has resulted in psychological conflict between Chris's escapism and his gender dysphoria issues, as the imaginary friend Sonichu identifies as a male while Chris identifies as a female. In chat with the plays from the 17th of January 2021, as well as on Twitter the following day, Sonichu in Chris's body complained about Chris in Sonichu's body putting mascara on. Are you following all of this? Because, well, by that point in the proceedings, people were just like, yeah, but when do we get to the part where Chris actually, did this and that and the other to his own mother? Like, when are we going to get to the fireworks factory? Also, these are just pictures that Chris took while transitioning. I don't really feel like I have anything else to say, apart from, for some reason, Chris was using menstrual pads, because apparently Chris still had, issues with his, gut, as it were. Then, of course, there's a series of fan art, and to be honest, I'm pretty much going to try and skip past most of it, because, I can only take a guess that, there are just some things that probably we should not be seeing. So, that was that. Right, okay, so for the most part, I believe that is technically where it ends when it comes to the article about Chris being transgender. And there are quite a lot of things that this article does mention that a lot of people are very, very, undeterred about. Now, the first of those is that, whether or not Chris was being completely serious about being transgender. Now it is argued that Chris was, because do you think Chris would have gone to as much effort as she had already if she was not serious about this? That's kind of the first point of contention. About, do you really think Chris, because deciding to become transgender is not the sort of thing it's a bit like what I said about the fantasy about becoming a parent. It's not the sort of thing you just decide, that is what you want to do. It's about commitment. It's about the rest of their lives. And, it's not the sort of thing you could just fantasize about. If you're going to, don't play as being a parent, actually be one. And be there for your kids. So, do you think Chris really would have gone to all this trouble if she was not that serious? Well, that's the sort of thing where I'm sort of more in the category of, maybe Chris was serious, or maybe the thought that Chris could actually know women better by actually being one. Maybe that's kind of where it is. But again, the problem we sort of have always had is that the actual definition of rather why Chris wanted to do this in the first place has sort of been myriad in the facts that Chris has come up with ideas and stories, from being somebody at Woodstock to well, I just kind of always was one, despite the fact that, well, Chris prior to this was very brazen about not being this, which some may say is just one of those examples of somebody trying to, deny what they really feel. I've seen those sort of things being done before, but this one seemed almost, well, very, very off guard. In short of, well, all the other things that Chris has said and, well, done, that a lot of people are very, very receptive and dismissive about Chris's, well, decision making, if we're going to put it lightly. Now, with that being said, and then I'll wrap this whole video up by basically what I was going to say in the very beginning about what my own personal issues about this are. Well, in light of recent events that have happened in the UK, my opinions about it are nothing. And yeah, that might be a little bit of a twist ending, ladies and gentlemen, but personally, I don't really feel like I've got any real strong opinions about this whatsoever. Because, well, one, I'm not transgender, and second, well, because I'm not, and I'm not entirely sure where else I'm meant to go apart from, well, there is, of course, one little thing, I suppose, and it's, well, it's a small thing, but, well, back when I was about 19, I thought maybe I had gender dysphoria and stuff like that, but then I had to have a very serious talk with myself, and I kind of came to the conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, that, well, even though I thought my life at that point was dreadful, because even though I was at university, and that, well, life was literally going nowhere, did I honestly feel that actually wanting to become a woman was actually going to improve anything, or was it actually just going to bring more problems? And that's not even acknowledging the fact that about, well, did I really think about being a woman for any other reason than thinking that apparently that was just gonna, like, wave a proverbial magic wand and it was gonna solve all my problems? Of course, because I live in the real world, I kind of came to the conclusion that no, it was not going to solve my issues, and I kind of never really thought about it 8 years down the line now. And to be honest, it probably won't either, because, well, if I was really that serious, I probably would have acted upon something about it a long time ago. Secondly, well, not second, like, there's a whole bunch of stuff out there, but you know what I really didn't like about, well, it wasn't the ruling that caused me to raise an eyebrow. It's, well, the way the papers were describing it. The Daily Mail, for example, a notorious right-wing newspaper that used to support the German Nazi Party back in the 1930s, they went with an article about, victory for women and common sense. I think, well, rather it's that court rules, women are this, and, a victory in common sense. And let me just say this for the moment right now, guys, and, well, you may have also got the impression of the wiki and through what I've said in this video about just deciding to be civil with each other. All I have to say following this up is that, well, as the way the Daily Mail described it, I looked at it as though it was a very smug way of putting it, because you should always be very, very skeptical whenever anybody ever says, things like, it's just common sense. Because I've seen that song and dance played so many times by a whole bunch of notorious bigwigs in the UK, they do it at any opportunity when anything comes along where they feel that they can be clever about it. And I don't know about you, ladies and gentlemen, but there's a lot of people in this world right now who are nowhere near as clever as they think they are on any real particular issue whatsoever. And even in the case of the court ruling a couple of days ago, I half suspect that the only reason why they took any sort of interest in the story whatsoever was not in the interest of defending the rights of women. It was just so that they can kick the trans community into the dirt and just literally get just to rub salt on the wounds. With that being said, the reaction that a lot of other people have had in the UK has been, well, very mixed. Some are showing, they're still, some are wanting to show their support, and you know what, they're trying to tell people not to be discouraged, and that they try and trust the actual judgment of a lot of people to just know what the right and wrong thing is to do in certain situations. And it's just through things that have gone into place and stuff like that. But when it comes to Chris, well, considering Chris has never necessarily been one to go against the grain, i.e. completely defy all throws of logic when it comes to obeying the law and just does whatever Chris wants to do. Well, with that being said, Chris has been relatively quite quiet about what happens about, the women's restroom back in 2011. So either Chris just started using the male restroom again, or, well, it was never brought up again after this. Or maybe Chris never went to use public bathrooms after this and just did it from the privacy of her own home. I don't know because, well, I've got no evidence whatsoever to support either claim. Either way, it is just what it is. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, just to wrap all of this up, well, never be discouraged, ladies and gentlemen, for wanting to live your own life. Whether you want to live the remainder of your life exactly as you are, whether or not you have perhaps complications about where you're going in life, whether you feel like you're born in the wrong body or not, or whether or not you just feel something deep inside which tells you that something's not right and you kind of want to speak to somebody about it, well, maybe best to speak to somebody about it, because there are dozens of organizations out there who will actively give an open ear to people who feel confused and feel like they don't know what's happening. If for no other reason, ladies and gentlemen, well, if it is bugging you that much, I suggest either sorting it out or just don't think about it if it makes you feel that upset. Nothing really that Chris does really makes me feel that upset, because to be honest, Chris is just one person, and in the long term, I just choose to ignore it. Chris isn't a reflection of who I am, and Chris is certainly not going to be a reflection of who you are. So, there you are. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is symbolic of the statement of how you are everything that Chris isn't. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a symbolical reflection of reality. There you are. I managed to pull out a Life of Brian quote again. Sort of. And with all that being said and done, I hope that each and every one of you have enjoyed this article, and I cannot wait to see all of you guys again in the next video. So take care, and bye-bye for now. Well, hello again. And just before each and every one of you leave, if I could just hold your attention for a few more seconds, and I want to show you very quickly my Patreon store. I've been running this for 5 years now, and ever since this month began, I have decided to reopen, relaunch, completely sort out my categories for videos, and I've uploaded them sometimes as far as 3 months in advance. So you guys will be able to get an exclusive look exactly what's coming out, when it's coming out, at your convenience. So make sure to stop by, take a look around, and let's see what you think. Thank you very much for supporting me once again, and I'll see you again next time.